Sir, do you want me to fix it? The boy whispered, his hands black with grease eyes steady on the silent luxury car. In the middle of Sao Paulo's busiest avenue, a midnight black Rolls-Royce choked, hissed, and died, smoke curling up like a public confession. Inside sat Victor Hale, a wealthy car tycoon who built his reputation on perfection. Now he was trapped in traffic, surrounded by honking horns, phones recording strangers laughing. The humiliation burned hotter than the engine. Then came the voice at the window, a 12-year-old, thin as a wire, wearing a torn shirt, and the scent of oil. Leo Cruz wasn't begging, he was offering. Victor laughed cruelly. "You touch this car." But Leo calmly named the problem from the sound alone overheating. A seized water pump. The laughter faltered. Victor's suited partners stepped closer, filming like vultures. To turn the moment into entertainment, Victor made a bet money if the kid succeeded, punishment if he failed. Leo shook his greasy hand without blinking. What happened next silenced the street. Leo opened the hood like he'd known the engine his whole life. Fast, precise, fearless. 15 minutes later, the Rolls-Royce roared back to life, smooth as new. Victor stood frozen, not just shocked, but exposed. Leo's skill came from his father, Mateo, a struggling mechanic who taught him that knowledge doesn't need wealth, only hunger. And as the crowd's laughter turned into awe, Victor felt something unfamiliar rise in his chest, humility, and the beginning of change. "Turn the key," the boy said softly. Not proudly, not afraid, just certain. Victor Hale hesitated, his hand hovering over the ignition as if the car might betray him again, or worse, prove the impossible true. Around them, the street had gone unnaturally quiet. Even the phone's recording seemed to hold their breath. When the engine finally came alive, smooth and obedient, the sound didn't just fill the air, it cut straight through Victor's chest. For the first time in years, Victor didn't know what to say. The boy, Leo Cruz, stepped back, wiping his hands on an old rag, his face calm, as if he had just finished tying his shoes. There was no triumph in his eyes, no demand for applause, just relief that the machine worked again. That was what stunned Victor most. This wasn't luck. This wasn't a trick. This was mastery. You actually fixed it," Victor muttered, staring at the dashboard like it might explain itself. Leo nodded. It was simple. The car was asking for help. The words hit harder than any insult. Asking for help. Victor had built an empire pretending he never needed to. Yet here he stood, saved by a child he had mocked minutes earlier. A child the world would have dismissed at first glance. Dirty shoes, broken nails, no pedigree, no money. And yet Leo had heard what Victor couldn't, felt what Victor ignored, understood what Victor paid others to understand for him. The crowd's laughter had vanished, replaced by whispers of disbelief. The suited men who once filmed for amusement now lowered their phones, suddenly unsure where the joke had gone. It had turned inward. Victor reached for his wallet, but his hands trembled not from anger, but from something dangerously close to shame. "Where did you learn to do that?" asked his voice quieter now. Leo looked back toward a small, worn-down garage across the street. "From my father. And from books. And from listening." Victor followed his gaze and felt something crack inside him. Talent, raw and undeniable, had been standing in front of him all along, waiting not for permission but for recognition. Victor followed Leo's eyes across the street and saw the place most people never notice, a narrow garage with peeling paint, a crooked sign, and a man bent beneath an old car, legs sticking out, hands moving with quiet devotion. Mateo Cruz didn't look up. He was too busy earning a living the only way he knew how, honestly, patiently, with his own hands. "That's my dad," Leo said. His voice softened not with pride, but with gratitude. He taught me everything. Victor watched as Matteo slid out from under the car, wiped his forehead with a rag already stained by years of labor, and smiled at his son with a warmth money could never buy. That smile told a whole story of long mornings, unpaid repairs for neighbors who couldn't afford them, of lessons taught not in classrooms, but in silence, repetition, and trust. "We don't have much," Leo continued almost apologetically. "So we read. Manuals, old forums, whatever we can find. My dad says knowledge doesn't get heavier when you carry more of it." The words landed slowly, painfully. Victor had grown up believing the opposite, that access created intelligence, that wealth unlocked mastery. Yet here was a boy who had memorized engines the way other children memorized video games, not because he was promised a future, but because he was preparing for one no one else had imagined for him. Matteo finally noticed the small crowd and hurried over, panic flickering in his eyes, when he saw the luxury car and the well-dressed men. "Leo," he said gently but firmly, "did you touch something that wasn't ours?" Leo shook his head. "I fixed it. He said it was okay." Matteo turned to Victor, already bracing for anger apology ready on his tongue. But Victor felt his throat tighten. This man wasn't raising a prodigy. He was raising a human being with dignity, discipline, and an unshakable sense of worth. In that moment, Victor understood something he'd spent a lifetime avoiding. Poverty wasn't the absence of value. It was often the place where values were forged the strongest. Victor Hale didn't speak right away. He stood there while traffic slowly resumed, while the crowd dispersed, while life moved on as if something inside him hadn't just shifted forever. He watched Leo walk back toward his father, watched the boy hand over the money, without excitement, without celebration, only respect. Matteo didn't count it immediately. He placed a hand on his son's shoulder first. That small gesture struck Victor harder than the repaired engine ever could. For years, Victor had mistaken control for strength. He had built companies, bought silence, commanded rooms. Yet standing on that street, he felt smaller than he ever had, not because he had been defeated, but because he had been revealed. A memory surfaced uninvited. A hospital room bathed in white light, a boy's hand slipping from his grasp. Far too soon. Ethan, his son. 12 years old. Curious. Brilliant. Gone before the world had a chance to see him become anything at all. Victor swallowed hard. If Ethan had lived, would he have sounded like Leo? Would he have looked at machines with that same quiet reverence? Victor had buried those questions under work, under wealth, under arrogance, so thick it passed for armor. But now, watching Leo laugh softly at something his father whispered, the armor cracked. He realized the truth with painful clarity. Money had never made him powerful. It had only insulated him from humility. And humility, raw, unpolished, earned through struggle, was exactly what stood before him now, in the shape of a grease-stained boy and a tired mechanic. Victor took a step forward, slower this time, careful with his words. "I was wrong," he said, not loudly, not dramatically, just honestly. Matteo looked up, surprised. Leo stilled. I laughed. Victor continued, his voice tight. "And I shouldn't have. What you gave me today wasn't a repair. It was a reminder of who he used to be, of who he still could be." As Leo met his eyes, Victor felt something unfamiliar but necessary take root. Regret, yes, but also resolve. This moment wasn't an ending. It was an awakening. Victor Hale had always believed that opportunity was something people earned alone. That afternoon shattered the lie. He watched Matteo close the garage door as the street finally cleared the old hinges, groaning like tired bones. Leo lingered by the entrance, glancing back once more at the Rolls-Royce, no longing in his eyes, only curiosity, as if it were just another machine with a story to tell. That was when Victor made a decision that frightened him more than any risky investment ever had. "Wait," he said. Father and son turned. Victor stepped closer. No entourage now, no cameras, no performance. Just a man stripped of certainty. "I don't want this to end here," he said. "What you did today, it shouldn't disappear into traffic." Matteo stiffened. Years of broken promises had taught him caution. "My son did a job," he replied evenly. "You paid him. That's enough." Victor nodded. "For the repair, yes, but not for what he showed me." He gestured toward the garage. "This place, how long have you been working like this?" 15 years, Matteo said. "Some good months, some bad ones." Victor imagined 15 years of bent backs and unpaid hours of choosing between rent and tools of teaching brilliance in a room the world refused to see. What if it didn't have to stay this way? He asked quietly. Leo looked up sharply. Matteo frowned. "We don't want charity." "Neither do I," Victor answered. "I want partnership." The word hung in the air, heavy and dangerous. Victor explained slowly, funding to modernize the garage, proper equipment training, access to clients who trusted him with machines worth millions. Not ownership, not control, support, space to grow. And Leo Victor added, turning to the boy, "Your place is in school first. Always. Talent like yours deserves theory, mentors doors that shouldn't be closed just because you were born on the wrong side of one." Leo swallowed. Matteo's eyes burned. "You don't know us," Matteo said, voice shaking. "Why would you do this?" Victor hesitated, then chose truth. "Because I lost a son. And because today you reminded me that honoring him doesn't mean freezing in regret. It means opening doors for someone else." Silence stretched between them, fragile and electric. Matteo finally spoke. "If we do this, my son's dignity comes first." Victor extended his hand. "Always." Leo watched their hands meet grease-stained fingers clasping a man used to gold, and felt something shift deep inside him. For the first time, his future didn't feel like a dream he had to protect alone. It felt like a path unexpected, earned, and finally seen. The first sign of trouble arrived quietly, wrapped in paperwork and polite smiles. One morning, Leo found the garage door sealed shut with a bright red notice stamped by the city. Temporarily closed. Matteo stood frozen, reading the words again and again, as if they might change. Inspectors spoke in rehearsed tones, missing permits, outdated equipment, safety violations that had existed for years, but had never mattered before. Not until now. By noon, whispers spread through the neighborhood. By evening, Victor received the call he'd been expecting but hoping wouldn't come. "This is Ricardo," said the voice on the other end, one of Victor's longtime partners. "Smooth, controlled. I hear you're throwing money at a back-alley garage. Bad optics. Bad business." Victor didn't answer. Ricardo continued, his tone sharpening. "People like that don't need opportunities. They need limits. You're blurring lines." Victor hung up without a word, but the damage was already moving. Suppliers suddenly delayed shipments. Applications stalled. Doors that had opened days ago now refused to budge. This wasn't coincidence. It was punishment. Matteo felt the weight immediately. "I told you," he said to Victor one night, sitting in the dark garage. "People don't like it when the poor rise. It makes them nervous." Leo listened silently, fists clenched. For the first time, his talent felt dangerous, not to machines, but to egos. Then something unexpected happened. The next morning, a woman from the neighborhood brought coffee and pastries, setting them gently on the closed garage steps. "You fixed my car when I couldn't pay," she said. "This is nothing." By afternoon, more people came. Old clients, taxi drivers, delivery workers. They brought food, shared stories, stood beside the locked door like a quiet protest. Someone filmed it. Someone else shared it. By nightfall, the video was everywhere. Let them work. Talent is not a crime. This garage saved us. Victor watched the footage, chest tight. Ricardo had underestimated something fundamental. You can intimidate individuals, but not a community bound by gratitude. Still, the threat was real. Lawsuits loomed, Delays could stretch for months. Leo lay awake that night, fear gnawing at his confidence. What if this was a mistake, he whispered. Victor knelt beside him. No, he said firmly. This is what happens when you challenge systems built on exclusion. Resistance means you're doing something right. Outside, the city buzzed with noise and judgment, but inside that small garage, something stronger had taken root. They weren't alone anymore. The reckoning came not with shouting, but with truth. Slow, undeniable, and devastating. Victor arrived at this garage before sunrise the next morning, not in his Rolls-Royce, but alone. He carried a thin folder under his arm, his face calm in a way Leo had never seen before. It's time, he said simply. Inside that folder were recordings, documents, timestamps, proof that Ricardo hadn't just raised concerns, but had pulled strings, bribed officials, and weaponized regulations to crush something he couldn't control. A system designed to protect had been twisted to punish. And this time, Victor refused to look away. By noon, lawyers were involved. By evening, the story broke, not as gossip, but as exposure. Cameras returned to the garage, no longer curious, but furious. Headlines shifted. The narrative flipped. The same officials who had sealed the doors now avoided eye contact, suddenly cautious, suddenly polite. An emergency hearing was scheduled. Evidence was entered. Names were named. Ricardo tried to laugh it off at first, then he threatened. Then he begged. None of it worked. In a quiet office downtown, Victor faced him one last time. You didn't lose because you were outsmarted, Victor said evenly. You lost because you forgot that power without integrity always leaves fingerprints. Ricardo's empire collapsed faster than anyone expected. Contracts dissolved. Partners distanced themselves. Investigations multiplied. The man who once believed himself untouchable walked out of that building smaller than the boy he had tried to erase. 2 days later, the red notice was removed. When the garage doors finally opened again, the street erupted, not with cheers, but with relief. Matteo sank onto a stool, covering his face with his hands. Leo stood frozen, absorbing the moment, understanding for the first time that justice wasn't abstract. It was built piece by people willing to stand up when it mattered. Victor watched them quietly. He didn't feel victorious. He felt aligned. This doesn't erase what happened, Matteo said, voice unsteady. No, Victor replied, but it decides what happens next. That night, Leo stayed late, wiping down tools that had never failed him. He paused, looking around the garage. Same walls, same smell of oil, but everything felt different. Not because the danger was gone, but because courage had been answered. Justice hadn't arrived as a miracle. It came as consequence. And for the first time, Leo understood something profound. When dignity is defended, even the most powerful cruelty eventually collapses under its own weight. The doors stayed open, and this time, they would not be closed quietly again. Years passed quietly at first, then all at once. The small garage that once struggled to keep its doors open no longer smelled of desperation, but of possibility. Fresh paint covered old cracks. New machines hummed beside worn tools that Matteo refused to throw away, reminders of where everything began. Above the entrance, a new sign stood firm in the sunlight. Cruz & Son Automotive, where talent meets opportunity. Leo grew taller. Stronger. But what changed most was his gaze, still curious, still gentle, now sharpened by purpose. By day, he studied engineering equations dancing effortlessly in his mind. By night, he returned to the garage, sleeves rolled up, teaching younger kids from the neighborhood how engines spoke if you listened closely enough. He never forgot what it felt like to be unseen. Matteo watched it all with quiet awe. The boy who once learned by flashlight and borrowed manuals now explained complex systems to rooms full of students. And yet every evening, Leo still asked, "Did I do good today, Dad?" The question never changed. Victor often stood at the back of the room, unnoticed, listening. He had traded arrogance for attentiveness, control for contribution. The loss of his son never disappeared, but it softened, reshaped into something that built instead of broke. Helping Leo hadn't replaced his grief. It had given it direction. On the day the training center officially opened, the street filled again just like that first morning. But this time, there were no sirens, no barriers, no fear, only applause. Leo stepped forward to speak, his hands trembling just slightly. "I was once laughed at for believing I could fix something bigger than myself," he said. "What I learned is this: machines can be repaired with skill, but lives are repaired with beliefs." He looked at his father, then at Victor. "Someone believed in me when it mattered. So now this place exists to make sure no talent is ever dismissed because of where it comes from." Years later, when journalists asked Leo what his greatest repair had been, he didn't mention luxury cars or awards. He smiled softly and answered, "I fixed a broken moment, a moment where pride met humility and chose to change." Because in the end, the story was never about a car. It was about a boy with grease-stained hands who dared to speak up, a father who taught dignity without wealth, and a man powerful enough to admit he was wrong. And that choice, made on an ordinary street, changed everything. In the end, the lesson Leo carried into adulthood was simple, but it had taken a lifetime to earn. Talent, he learned, is not loud. It doesn't announce itself with titles, expensive schools, or polished words. Often it arrives quietly, wearing worn shoes and carrying borrowed tools. What gives talent the power to change lives is not money, but someone willing to see it, respect it, and give it a chance. Leo never forgot the day he stood on a crowded street, mocked for daring to speak. He never forgot the laughter, the doubt, the way the world tried to shrink him to fit its expectations. But he also never forgot the moment that followed, the moment humility defeated arrogance, when belief replaced ridicule, and when one choice rewrote many futures. Years later, standing in a thriving workshop filled with young apprentices, Leo understood the truth his father had taught him all along. Wealth can open doors, but character decides what happens once you walk through them. And dignity, once defended, becomes unstoppable. Victor learned his own lesson too. That real success isn't measured by how much you own, but by how many lives are lifted because you chose compassion over pride. And Matteo proved that a parent doesn't need riches to raise greatness, only integrity, patience, and love. Never judge potential by appearance. Never silence courage just because it comes from unexpected places. And if you are ever in a position to help, do it. Because one moment of belief can undo years of injustice. Someone out there is waiting for a chance. Be the person who gives it. If this story moved, you share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever been underestimated or believed in someone when no one else did? Subscribe to the channel for more stories that remind us kindness, humility, and courage still change the world.